Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a former teacher and journalist, passionate about reading and writing. Her third novel, Sisters of the Undertow, was named Best of the University Press's 100 Books in 2020. She served as a speaker for the 2020 TED Talk, Fearless Women series. She also supports young writers in public schools through the Letters About Literature program with the Texas Center for the Book and with the Write for Mississippi program. Her family home is located 100 miles from the Texas-Mexico border, hence the setting of her upcoming novel, covering the very important topic of human trafficking across the border. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Johnnie Bernhard.
Hello, Julia. It's wonderful to be here today and to meet you virtually. We've been talking beforehand, and we share some places and people in our history. So as a Texas Mississippian, thank you for having me on your podcast.
We're thrilled to have you here. And our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, so what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I've always been in the writing-reading business with degrees in journalism, and I worked at a newspaper in Houston many, many years ago. Later went into public education, was an English teacher. I love story. I've always loved story. I've been married to the love of my life, my entire life. I have 2 grown children. And it wasn't until 50, which I saw several years ago, that I said, it's time to write that novel I've been talking about since I was 12, but never carved out the time to do it. So with the blessings of my family and friends, I started working and haven't really stopped because I feel like I'm fortunate to have this time to focus on writing. So wrote A Good Girl, so I've been able to put out a book every 2 years. Thankful for it, but I've never seen, Julia, and I hope your listeners and you will agree, that time is not wasted. You know, I feel like perhaps it took me this long to be mature enough to understand the human story and to be able to write it.
I think that is so true. And the reason I call writing in life's sweetest third for those in our age group, because we've gained from the wisdom and 2020 hindsight, and we have a lot still to say.
And that's really what I talked about in my TED Talk in 2020. And everybody has a version of 2020. And each version is important and noteworthy, is that the experience and the beauty of older women are often neglected in this country because we're a culture of youth and image. And it's also one of the themes within Hannah and Ariella, my 4th novel coming out August 1st, that there's much to be gained in life as we age. A friend of mine said, every day is a school day. Every single day we have a chance to learn something. We don't give up learning and understanding beginning at 50. It intensifies.
Yes. Tell us more about the TED Talk. How does that even come about? And were you intimidated or was it exciting?
Oh, absolutely. I was scared to death. And the first thing I thought was, what do I have to say that people want to hear? And through a contact, I was able to do the Southern Book Festival in Nashville, and it was virtual. And I was heartbroken, like many people doing all these virtual events, but at least we had that mechanism, and it's become our new normal. And through something with the Southern Book Festival, I got an email one day saying, would you like to do a TED Talk? And I was intimidated. I was shocked. I didn't sleep. And I really thought a lot about 2020. And what did we learn? What did we gain from isolation, fear of the unknown, all the political health changes, all of these major changes in 1 year around the world? So I thought about what connects all of us as human beings, whether I'm in Kerrville, Texas, or I'm in Budapest, Hungary, I'm in London, England. What connects me with every human being on this planet, regardless of geography, race, and religion? And that is the need to be loved and loved. That's it. What does every human being want? To be recognized. You're worthy of love. You're lovable. And so through that, it wasn't a one draft and it's out the door for a talk. Many, many drafts and pacing. I realized those themes were reflected in our conversation with each other. How do we speak to each other today? How did we speak to each other in 2020? And ageism and race, and what is everyone seeking? And that's the ability to love and be loved, to be recognized, to be told your story matters. Whatever you're saying matters. So that's those are a lot of the themes I write about in self-discovery and connecting to other human beings. I always have an immigrant element in each of my books. Could be an Irish immigrant, could be German. I'm part of a multi-generation Texas family that came when Texas was a republic and the land grants were being sold all over Europe. So, my people come from Germany and from Ireland. And the more I dug into this story, the more I realized we're all immigrants. We're all coming from somewhere. We're all looking for acceptance. So, yeah, it's a theme I write about a lot, Julia. I'm very curious about it.
Well, it's very profound. Loving and being loved is certainly very complex. Once you knew you had to write your first book, Johnnie, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent? Did you decide to choose a hybrid or a small press, or did you self-publish?
I searched for an agent. I saw becoming a writer, I was changing professions, and I had to learn about a new profession. So I went to every conference I could go to. I read a lot. I studied. I eventually found an agent. That particular agent handled my first novel. I knew what I was writing was not commercial fiction. I knew that. I was writing literary fiction. Today we call it upmarket fiction. So I knew I had to be with a medium-sized press or a university press. I was fortunate to be picked up by University Press in Texas, part of the Texas Book Consortium. All the distribution comes from Texas A&M Press. They've got great distribution. I've been very happy. I've stayed within that consortium. It's traditional publishing, with Hannah and Ariella moving to TCU Press in Fort Worth. still partnering with A&M Press. They're great people. I feel, every author has a journey, and you have to decide at the beginning of all this, who do I want to be? What am I trying to say as a writer? And I knew what I wanted. Julia, I wanted my book in the library, and I wanted it to be respectable. And it's worked very well for me. I'm grateful for that. I'm not going to say it's easy. I mean, that debut novel, in the agent pitching it, I was probably rejected at least 100 times, particularly by the big commercial presses. And, and speaking with the agent, I said, hey, I'm not writing commercial fiction. I'm an apple. I'll never be an orange. Let's just accept that and find the best home. And I was lucky that Dr. Paul Ruffin, here's our Mississippi, Texas connection again, Julia. It has a divinity to it, I think. Dr. Paul Ruffin, excellent author, unbelievable short stories, grew up in Mississippi, taught at Mississippi State. In, I believe, the late 70s, he went to Huntsville and started Texas View Press as part of a university press in Huntsville at Sam Houston State. I think he was a Texas Poet Laureate. He read the first couple of chapters of A Good Girl, which has a Mississippi, Texas, and Ireland setting, and loved it, I was fortunate. But, in telling this story, I want writers to know when they're looking for that press, it just takes that right connection. Don't necessarily beat yourself up and force what you're doing to become something that particular press isn't looking for. There's a place for everyone. Of course, do the best you can in polishing that manuscript, but every writer has a unique journey. And I think it's important to really know your genre and what you're writing. What am I writing? What's my message? Who is that audience? So that's been my story in the publishing process.
Well, your work is highly respected because not everyone can be published by university presses. So that shows the quality of your work.
Well, thank you for saying that, Julia. But just a shout out to those writers that may be listening to your podcast. If you're writing upmarket fiction, literary fiction, and you're writing novellas or poetry, chapbook of poetry or short story or essay, the university presses are still the presses publishing that type of work. Of course, many years ago, decades ago, the big houses published that kind of work. But publishing has changed. And because those university presses are financially supported by a university press or by a university itself, they can take that financial leap where many times a commercially driven press cannot. That doesn't mean I don't have to get out and market and sell that book. I still do. But it's a different mechanism, and I think worth exploring if you're that type of writer.
Talk to us about that marketing, because a lot of writers just dread that word. What works for you?
Well, I try to do a little bit of everything, like being invited to this podcast, which I'm grateful to be a part of today. I think, like deciding what type of writer you want to be, you have to decide how to build your writing community. So it's not just about me and my writing community. If it were just about me and my books, I would have a very small fan base. I have to get out. I have to realize that for a bookstore to have my book on their shelf, I'm fortunate, because that's a financial risk that bookseller is taking and having my book there. I try to support other authors. I share a lot. try to be a good member of the writing community. Because if you write and market in a bubble, you're going to have a very small audience. And it's unfortunate that many writers, before they're published, may think, all I got to do is publish that book and get it to a publisher, and they're going to take care of me. I'm afraid it doesn't work that way anymore. I have friends that are New York Times bestsellers, and that's a moniker that has a certain mechanism to it as well. They have to market too. They have to get out there. I recognize marketing is a lot of work, Julia, but it's work that is necessary, because when I signed the contract with the publisher, we became partners, and I'm holding up my end of the responsibility. And if I don't market my book, then there's not going to be another book for me as an author. It took me a long time to get here. I want to work hard to make sure that that still happens. So I get nervous about it. It is a lot of work, but when I'm there in the moment, when someone takes time out of their day and comes to a bookstore and buys my book, it's magical. I'm very grateful for that opportunity. Building up to that is a little scary and time consuming, but the reader makes it all worth that.
It really does. It's a thrill when you're sitting there and a stranger walks up and has found your book, and they're not your family, they're not your friends. They've just found you, and it is magical.
Yes, yes.
Johnnie, what is your inspiration? How do you come up with the premise of your books?
Well, I'm an observer. When I was young, I wasn't a great observer. As I've become older, and perhaps this is why it's taken to this stage of my life to become a published author, I'm much more observant. I pay attention to how people interact with each other, what they say to each other. And I could be struck by a conversation I overhear, by something I see on television, something I read, and it percolates in my mind. And some writers call that the muse, but it percolates until I create a character that begins speaking and taking that story on a journey through the plot and other characters being developed. I am very character driven. I think of a character and what that character is trying to say or what she has learned, and that percolates until the story, the plot begins to build. I often never, ever know how to begin. Sometimes I have a clear ending. It may change, but it always begins with character and her unique journey. So I've written from the protagonist of Young Girls to Hannah and Ariella, this protagonist. It's a multi-point of view, which wore me out. Each character is speaking in first person, the main characters. But the two principal main characters, Hannah is from Central Texas, 73 years old. And Ariella is a 14-year-old girl from Zaragoza, Mexico. And through fate, they're brought together. So they're polar opposites in world, how they've grown up, privilege, how they view life, but there's a common denominator there. And again, we're going to go back to that TED Talk. What connects us all, despite geography, race, and religion? The need to love and be loved. So Hannah at 73, culturally, people are telling her, you're 73 years old, go move into a retirement home, join a book club, and go on a cruise once a year. She's grown up most of her life on working ranches. Now, when I say ranch, that doesn't mean Dallas and people doing the work for you. It's a working ranch. It is hard, brutal work. Even putting a fence post in Central Texas You know that because the dirt is rocky. You're lucky if you get half an inch of topsoil. The rest, you have to break up the rock with a drill bit. That often breaks. So this is the way Hannah's grown up. She knows hard work, and she loves the freedom of the land. She loves animals. But culturally, everybody's saying you're 73, you can't do this anymore. Zip it up, sell the ranch, move in a retirement home. And for Ariela, growing up in Zaragoza, Mexico, culturally, she's being told your expectations in life are very limited because of poverty, lack of education, but you're allowed to dream. That's something no one can steal. So these two women come together unexpectedly, quite shockingly, and they both desperately need each other to redefine their lives.
It's a beautiful synopsis of your new book. So why don't you read for us now a few paragraphs so that we can hear your voice and tone in the book?
Thank you. Here is my cover. And let me give this as just a tiny bit of understanding what the book's about. When Hannah, a 73-year-old widow, finds the semi-conscious body of a 14-year-old Mexican national in a ditch along a remote Central Texas road, she has no idea someone is watching. Not until the girl's brutal attacker arrives at Hannah's door in the middle of the night, threatening not just the girl, but Hannah's very survival. Ultimately, the question of justice for a victim of human trafficking and the woman who helps her lies in the hands of a biracial Border Patrol officer and an unconventional small-town sheriff. The I-10 corridor of Texas connects saints, demons, and victims as the ultimate question of life and death is decided by two strangers fate has bound together. They must make a hard choice in order to survive. Either follow the law or follow their conscience. So this is from chapter 1, and we're introduced to Hannah, who has just buried the love of her life, a man of French immigrant lineage from Central Texas. When I stepped out into the porch of our ranch, the wind bit hard, raw, smarting my eyes. I strained to see in the dark. What was I looking for? I kept asking myself. It was ridiculous I was even out here. What if my son was up watching me? He'd think I'd lost my mind. But it didn't stop me. I stared out into the night sky at the stars, remembering when August taught me the names of each constellation, correcting my pronunciation a few times, only to make sure I wouldn't embarrass myself in front of anyone less loving. They say you're either a preacher or a teacher in this life. He was a teacher who never wanted me to go through life with only the half-truths of things so infinite and beautiful as a star or the love between a man and woman. August Duran, I know you're here. I can feel you in the wind and in the breaking of the cedar branches covered in ice. Hold me just one more time and tell me what you think I should do with the rest of my life without you. Should I sell this place? Don't know if I have it in me to run it alone. For the first time in my life, I feel vulnerable, almost afraid of being out here by myself. I heard Abby barking, scratching at the door, trying to get out. Just as I turned to go back in, Sammy opened the door. Mama, you all right? He reached for me, and unlike most of the years of my life, I didn't struggle to be the strong one. I wept shamelessly in my son's arms, finally knowing what it felt like to hit rock bottom.
That is so poignant, Johnnie. That is just lovely. Thank you for reading. Our listeners love to hear the authors read their work. And I've been told that that's how a lot of people choose their next work, is from the short passage that they hear here on the podcast. So we appreciate your reading that. And it makes me think of all of these family ranches here in Texas, and how people are coming to those decisions. What do we do with the land? I am always interested in how our writers choose their character names. How do you come up with yours? You've got some interesting ones.
Well, so I always begin with character. It's character driven in that I plot out the characters. So Hannah is 73 today. And what is her lineage? What is her historical background, genealogy? And so I made her German. There's a lot of Texas Germans growing up in Central Texas. We know their story coming here when Texas was a republic, and how they literally broke rock to feed themselves. So I might do a little search in the Texas Almanac online about German names and people landing in Texas during that time, and research what names were popular for girls during that time. So that's generally how I find the names. So Hannah Schoen, Schoen, is a German name. And August Duran, because August's family is from Castroville, west of San Antonio. And that was founded by a French immigrant during the Texas Republic, Henry Castro, who came from Paris, borrowed the money from a Paris bank to move all these immigrants from France and land them in Texas. Can you imagine what they thought when they got to Central Texas, where rainfall is scarce, that rocky soil, that incredible ship voyage, and then landing in Galveston or Indianola, south of there near Corpus, and making that wagon trail ride to Central Texas. You know, there's a lot to learn from the immigrants who settled this country, people that were willing to sacrifice their life for a chance at a new life, a better life. So that's where I get those names. Auguste Duran. Duran is of French descent, and August is an interesting character. So here we have this woman of German heritage and this man of French heritage finding each other, the love of their lives. And of course, he takes her to Paris for a honeymoon. And that's a whole chapter because it needs to be a Paris honeymoon.
What, if anything, did you edit out of your book? I'm always told by editors, oh, you can lose that chapter. Or, did you lose anything out of any of your books?
Well, oddly enough, I lost a lot out of the Paris chapter. I just kept on and on. I've been fortunate enough to go to Paris several times. My mother's of French descent. And I just couldn't stop writing about the food, or, when Hemingway was there in the 20s, and Fitzgerald and all the great expatriate Americans and what they thought about being in Paris after World War I. So that's a little bit of the English teacher in me. I taught a lot of the lost generations of writers when I was teaching. So I just made that chapter way too long because I love Paris and that unique history of writers there.
What do you think was the best money that you've ever spent as a writer?
That's a great question, Julia. Putting gas in the car, and no matter where that book club is located, I'm going to be there. If you invite me, I am so honored. I'm going to show up. And it's been absolutely wonderful. I never felt afraid. I don't know if that's naivety on my part, but I've driven up and down back roads of Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and showed up, knocked on the door, and there's a group of women, their book club sitting in the living room. Come on in. And It's such a, for people you don't know, that book is a catalyst for creating intimacy. So, when readers read a book, it's not so much they're thinking about you, the author, they're thinking of their own life and how they would respond to what's happening in the book. Authors need to remember that. So when you get this question as an author out of left field and you're thinking, I wasn't thinking about that at all. That reader was thinking about that. He or she is bringing in their own personal history. That is, I don't know, there's a certain divinity in that, in the artistry, in that intimacy between the book, the reader, and the author. So yes, the best money I've ever spent, road food, gas, might get a hotel for the night. It's all been worth it. I feel so fortunate. And at this time in my life, I'll be 60 in August. So I've made the cut of this podcast. I'm fortunate. I love doing this. It's great to be part of something this magical.
And for all those book clubs out there, some of us have been in book clubs for 20 or 30 years, and we've read hundreds of books, but we've never had an author show up. So when you do, it is magical, and it is something because we revere books so much that that person who put those words on the page, they mean something to us, and we feel like we've gotten to know them through their words. So I love, when you show up at a book club to talk to them. Do you make time to read for yourself for pleasure, or has writing and editing ruined that for you?
Well, I will say it's a thinly sliced pie these days, and I have to be careful. I will never, or I try never to say no to a new author when asking for a book blurb, because so many authors have been kind to me and written that book blurb. I try to give a lot to the writing community, and sometimes I just need to rest because I'm not thinking on the level I need to be thinking to write that book blurb, to do that editing, to hit the road, all those things I need to do. I still have my favorites, the greats to read. Barbara Kingsolver was a huge Larry McMurtry fan. I just, he's great Texas author, Lonesome Dove, the Pulitzer writer. I always refer back to that book. If I could write those words, what a master storyteller. So yes, you still as a writer, as an author, have to read those greats, because it really goes hand in hand, the reading and the writing. Wouldn't you agree?
I think it's our lifeblood. I think it's how we feed ourselves. And I have to listen to audiobooks now because I don't have time to sit and read. But if I'm going to be exercising or driving in a car for 14 hours, I'm going to get several books in on the way. How about ending our chat today, Johnnie, with advice for writers 50 and over?
Don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't be afraid to tell your authentic, true gut, true heart story. I think that's a fear many of us have starting out. Maybe this is too much to tell. Absolutely, there are going to be the naysayers, but you're putting blinders on and you are telling your authentic story you were meant to tell, you were meant to write, because you never know the person you're going to help, you are going to heal by writing your authentic story. Now, this isn't something I made up. Hemingway said, write a true sentence. And I've even heard other authors say, I don't agree with that, but think about what Hemingway is saying. When you write authentically with heart and mind combined, you are going to write the best story. If you let fear hold you back, you're not writing your best. You just aren't. So get over the fear. For every naysayer, there's going to be 10 people that say, oh my gosh, you don't know what this book did for me. And they will write you, and they'll find you and let you know that. And you'll be so glad you did. And as far as the rejection, when you believe in the authentic story you're writing, the rejection doesn't hurt as much. You have to fight for your story. You know, over 100 rejections. And I remember a large house in New York held on to that first book 6 months without a word, 6 months. I was pacing the neighborhood with my dog. It's a hard situation to be in. For them ultimately to tell me, you need to take out this, and this, and this. In other words, whitewash it, and said, I'm not going to do that. And I ended that conversation professionally, as you always have to, because it is a profession and you should honor it as such. But that publisher wasn't the right publisher. The right publisher will come along. Surround yourself in the right writing community, read books, take Zoom classes. There's lots of great writing centers. Gemini Inc. out of San Antonio that appeals to writers nationwide. Catholic Literary Arts. There's the Writing Source. There's a group out of Austin. There are classes being offered for everyone. You've got to learn your craft. You know, it just doesn't come innate. You have to learn it.
I think that's wonderful advice for us, and I just appreciate you sharing so generously with all of us today. And we are so happy that you're one of our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julia. Looking forward to meeting you in person. September 24, 10 a.m., Kerrville, Texas. It'll be a great time.
I'll be there. Thank you, Johnnie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.